you did your degree in social work. What motivated that choice? Why was that a choice for you to do? And I'll leave you far away.
Um, my sister Jenny Morrison, who's now deceased, did social work 2 years ahead of me, and we shared a bedroom. And littered around that bedroom were her books. Well, actually, not littered because she was a very tidy person. So in piles were her books, and in particular anthropology and sociology. But the Irving Goffman book on asylums, I really loved. It's very simply written, very understandable for someone who's untutored, and also Artie Lang. And I was just fascinated. There were case studies as well, of course. So what you were studying, what she was studying, was just fascinating. I mean, I just found it extraordinary, and I took a great interest and wanted to do it. So that was it. I did it. I followed her.
And the university you went to was?
The University of Queensland. Right. Yeah.
And were there any teachers or practitioners in that discipline that enthused you or influenced you?
Most of them did. It was a very radical group of teachers, and that was due to the politics of Queensland at the time, and in particular, the treatment of Indigenous people by the Queensland government. And at that stage, they were still locked in on reserves and had to ask permission to marry, had to ask permission to enter or leave. They were truly institutionalized in these reserves. And we wanted to get that act that was doing that repealed. And it was a very big movement for Black rights, as well as the Vietnam War, the Vietnam War, and of course, and then the more the radical and the more marching we did on behalf of those sort of civil rights, then the government became more and more rigid and pressed down on us. But the one teacher in particular was a woman called Rosine Hirschfield, and she introduced me to do my last placement in the Aboriginal and Islander Legal Service. And I went and worked there, where it worked very, very closely with Indigenous families all over the inner city of Brisbane. And I went to the courts every day and got people out on bail, and then worked on their social problems while the lawyers worked on their legal problems. And after 18 months, I went to and got a job in the Department of Children's Services. And they put me in the idea was to work precisely in the same area. And then I had more power. I had so much more power. So I could work towards getting families back together. Many of the children were in institutions that had been separated from their family. And if appropriate, I was able to return children to their families. I can also sort out a lot of the stuff with the benefits, because I had the power to do it. So it was a really interesting year. But after 2 years of that, 2.5 years of working in that area, I really was pretty exhausted. And I was very young too. When I look back at how young I was and what I experienced and saw, it's incredible, really.
I've kind of got a subsidiary question here, because this would have been in a period of the Bjelke Petersen government, a minority government that was able to govern because of a gerrymandered system in Queensland where you lived, I'm assuming. Yeah. So the treatment of Aboriginal people was brutal, as you've described.
Yeah.
So were you motivated by general just anti-racism, as well as the kind of social work theory that you'd learned during your degree?
I was changed forever almost immediately by witnessing the racism that I saw. I travelled all over Queensland with Indigenous people. I saw the most extraordinary racism. It was such a racist state, and this was backed up by the cops, by the institutions, by the government. It was appalling, absolutely appalling, and it's just tragic. I really witnessed a lot of blatant racism.
And the Bjelke Peterson government would have had a kind of what they call in Australia trifecta. So you would have had sort of anti-Aboriginal, brutal anti-Aboriginal racism, pro-mining companies and all that entails with land, attitudes toward land ownership. And then on top of that, very anti-trade union and very anti-protest. So you have all of that. You're in the mix of all of that activity.
Yeah, that's right.
So were you involved in the marches against this, the bans on street marching, if I remember correctly?
Oh yeah, obviously all of that. Like, so the Bjelke Peterson government, because the counterculture got so strong, and we were marching a lot. They then banned street marching, which is just incredible. So then we were really, really fighting on the street, you know. And you must remember at that time, you couldn't have an abortion in Queensland, and homosexuality was banned. I mean, homosexuality was banned. It's incredible to think of. All the gays had to leave, you know. It was just a really terrible time, and that's why our punk movement was so strong. That's why Queensland had the best punk bands.
Well, just before that period, you, as far as I understand, you get involved in, and I'm going to call it community theatre. Could you talk a little bit about that period?
Well, there's a bit of a jump there. So,
right.
But first of all, let me say that in the houses I was living in at that time, I was living with actors like Geoffrey Rush, another actor called Billy Brown, an actor who works over here in Coco Loco called Trevor Stewart, and it was a very, so it was an acting household, and we would a group of women and I were doing lots of street theatre in protest, but basically that whole house came over to Europe in 75 and 76. So I was just experiencing Europe. I was working in all different ways and traveling, going down to Covent Garden for dance and clown lessons and doing stuff like that. So I was here in Europe at that stage. By the way, for your listeners, I'm in London now by chance. And so I was here. And then I went back in 77, and that's when I got involved solidly with theatre. And the first theatre group I got involved with was called the Grin and Tonic. And what we did was we travelled around, and we did travel around in the back of a truck. Like, we actually travelled in the back of a truck. And we went to caravan parks, we went to schools, we went to just beaches and set up and did Shakespeare and Australiana poetry. That's what we did. And I did a year of that. It was like living like a gypsy. But that led me to go into a really great theatre company called the Popular Theatre Troupe, and that was straight political theatre, and run by a guy called Richard Fotheringham. And it was fantastic. He wrote, with another guy, Errol O'Neill, he wrote these really great, very, very funny satirical political plays. And we went into factories, we went into schools, we did lots of factories. We went out to the mining towns, we played at places where Utah builds. We had all our tires taken down on the van, the traveling van. We had sets that we put up, and it was, they were very, very left political theatre. It was kind of cartoonish, and yes, it was just great. So I did that for 2 years. So that was 77 and 78, and I had to make a choice, and the choice was to whether I was going to stay in theatre or whether I was going to go into music. And I made a choice. I actually did an audition and got into the Pram Factory in Melbourne, but after the audition, I just said no, I didn't want to do it, because I just was so involved with the politics of punk. And playing drums seemed to me such an ultimate political statement what we could do with music in Queensland. So, that's when I joined Zero. And of course, everybody knows my story from 1979 to 1989 when I was in the Go-Betweens. So we can probably skip all that.
Well, to come back a section, when you were doing the political theatre. Now, I mean, I did find out that the popular theatre troupe was funded by the Australia Council's Community Arts and Theatre streaming funding stream. But the thing I did wonder, well, what was the theoretical starting point? Was it just to popularise theatre where places where you wouldn't get any? I mean, if you're going to places where there are, say, I don't know, in trade union places.
We were going to factory floors. We were going to mining towns and setting up in kind of the local pub where everybody was drinking. But mostly we were going into the factory floors. So it's so interesting you should say that, because I guess that's what it was. I thought what we were doing was, just reinforcing the politics of the workers through the shows. But you're right, it was probably, it was probably taking theatre to people who never see theatre. Now I think about it. That's right.
Well, one of the things I did think was that if you were going into, let's say you were going up into, I mean, I don't know, if we went to Bundaberg or anywhere up north, if you went even much further up north, Cairns, etc., even further, where you have cane fields and so forth. Let's say you go to the local pub that those people drink at, they wouldn't be getting much theatre. They wouldn't be getting much arts activity. So I wondered if there was a kind of community basis, say, let's give people arts, but actually have it as relating to their lives. So not divorced from their lives. Would that be reasonable to say? Was that what you were trying to do?
I think it was more political than that as well, though. I mean, it was politically charged messages, about workers' rights, about the position of women. So I mean, it would have been both.
And how was it received?
Oh, like in the factories, they just loved us. It was just, hilarious. But, people just loved us. And, I mean, the shows were always going. We also did schools, I think. Some schools. You wouldn't have got into all the schools. But, yeah. I mean, it was pretty rough life, really. Both of those were rough. But that really did me well for moving into rock and roll, which was much rougher, so it did me well for that, traveling around in vans and sleeping rough, really.
In terms of, you just mentioned the question of playing the drums and saying there's a political element to that. What motivated you to pick up the drums in Queensland in the, what are we talking about, the mid to late 70s?
So it was 73, really, when I was living in that house that I was telling you about with the actors. There were also musicians there, and there was actually a dedicated music room, so there was a kit there, and I just wanted to play. I just loved it. It was, I mean, it's with a drum kit, you can just sit down and start playing. You don't have to mess around with electricity and leads. So it was, it was an easy choice for me to start playing. And then, obviously I started having lessons, and also there was a drummer in the house called Lindsay Arnold, who lives down in Hobart in Australia. And he's an old jazzer, and I guess he had quite a profound effect on me.
There wouldn't have been many, I'm trying to think of what kind of women drummers would you be looking at to be influenced by. I mean, I can really only think of Karen Carpenter. I mean, that's off the top of my head. Was that it? He was a very, very good drummer.
I mean, later on, obviously Mo Tucker, but Karen Carpenter was the only one, that's right, that I was aware of. Yeah. And hers, I loved Karen Carpenter, and I always thought it was a real shame that she moved off the drums and just to singing. But she had a pretty sad time of it.
And so did you have, once you picked up the drums, I mean, then you're committing yourself to quite a high level of practice and a high level, you can't just muck around with the drums. So was that factored into your life once you made?
Yeah, high level of practice came later. The high level of practice didn't come till, I mean, I was playing, even in both theatres, show in both companies I worked in, that we were always incorporating the drums. We were always trying to, but I didn't start really practicing till about 1977. Sorry, about 1978, 79. And that's when I really started working hard, uh, and getting my chops together. And I tell you, I mean, it takes years, just years, because I've just spent the last 2 years getting my chops together again, like really up to a good, fast, efficient, skilled level. And it takes years. It just is so much work. You've got to do it every single day. And I'm one of those people who, I mean, I like to do work on the practice pad, but I think working around the kit's a really good idea as well because of your feet.
Well, I want to move now to the community music side of your life, and I'm just going to pick a few examples of that and let you talk about it. But the first one I'm going to talk about is the Bondi Youth Wave. So if you could just tell people a little bit about your work in the Bondi Youth Wave, what it is and what your work in it was.
Well, that was my first community music job. So I had a daughter in 1991, and I really had to start finding work where I wasn't on the road. I tried to stay on the road with a group that I was in with Amanda Brown called Cleopatra Wong, and we both had young babies, and it was actually impossible. So I had to come to terms with that. That I would not be in a touring band anymore. I had to make money, and I went down to Bondi. I lived in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and I went down to Bondi, and I went to their community centre, and I said, I'm looking for work. And they said straight away, we've got this program. Would you like to work on it? And so basically, and I worked on that program for 25 years, and it changed during the course of it. But basically, it was getting groups of people, of young people. So first of all, it was older people. So it could be people from 17 to 25. That was the first 15 years. But then the schools started, the music schools. And so those people weren't looking for this sort of course anymore. They all went to the schools. They could go to the TAFEs, and they could get into those for free, and they could do music courses. So and they were particularly good for people with disadvantage. Anyway, so what we did was just songwriting, where they and arranging instruments, and then there was a recording, and then there was a show. So people would come and do that, but we changed that after about 15 years just to do secondary school kids, and then another program of primary school kids, because the older group were no longer wanting to do this sort of stuff because they'd go full time to a school. And yeah, I did that for 25 years. It was great, but it only ran 3 months of the year, from May to August, and the sessions would be just 2 hours. So it's not like a full-time job.
So was that kids? I mean, in that area, you usually think of the eastern suburbs of Sydney as quite an affluent area, and some of the areas around. But would that have brought in kids from all avenues of life, if you want to put it that way?
It did. So we were specifically looking for people with disadvantage, but it brought in people from all avenues of life. So we had kids from private schools, and we had kids from public schools. So I wouldn't say that it was a community music program that catered just for people with disadvantage, which most community music programs do.
And okay, well, the other piece of information I have is that you worked with the Junction House band, and if I understand that correctly, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So I honestly think it's the best work I did, although there's a few projects I'd talk to you about, Gordon, that I think were just great. But So the Junction House Band was a group of intellectually disabled musicians that I started working with in 1993. And the lead singer, songwriter, Brooke Crowley, is autistic, and he, he's quite autistic. Today a lot of people say they're autistic, but they function very highly. But these people had intellectual disabilities. He wrote incredible songs. Albert Blackley was on keyboard, and he could reproduce anything he heard, although he could only play one rhythm, which was boom tap, boom tap, boom tap tap, boom tap, like that. So everyone, often thought that I was doing a lot of work, but I wasn't. I was just putting them together. We had a great bass player in the name of Tony Elkins. He could play together, and we had a Down syndrome girl who started on drums and moved across to guitar, a violinist, and a lot of people would join. That they're the bases, and I was with those same people. I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. This is why it was so amazing as a project, as a community music project, because if something can stay together, you can really, really achieve a lot. We were together for like, I don't know, 20, 22 years, meeting every Sunday morning. We did 3 musical theatre shows, toured them. We played regularly all along the east coast of Australia. It was incredible. We made, I don't know, 4 albums. And sadly, there's only one thing that I've just put up on YouTube, because I set up a channel to start, putting some of this stuff. There's only really one visual of it, although I do have a video of one of the musicals we did. So I might have a look at that, of digitizing that and then taking a grab of that. So in the end, everyone people got too old. That was it, and, we'd kind of grown together, and it also meant I did get involved in their personal lives, and that they would get involved in my personal lives. If when we did shows, I would often have either Albert or Brooke or people staying over at my place if they lived out of town, and I got to know the families, and I'm still very friendly with some of the families, or it was quite complex in the end, as you would expect when you've been working with the same group of people for like 20 years. It was an amazing project. I'm very proud of it.
Did those people, is Junction, I mean, what's Junction House? What is Junction House?
It was a community centre for people with disabilities in the eastern suburbs. Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore.
And just on the point of, I mean, you're pulling about, no, I don't know if it was you or the band existed and you go into it, but however that process works, I mean, the music industry is not known for its kindness towards people with disabilities, or people, I mean, you could start with its attitude towards women and sexism, and then the question of racism, but in question of disabilities, there's another stage. So how did you cross those kind of boundaries? Because you said the band played live across the eastern suburbs or wherever else it played. How did that happen?
I said the east coast of Australia.
Oh, sorry, the east coast of Australia.
We had a residency up in Brisbane at the Wattaboshi Festival, which is an international festival of people with disabilities. We had a residency. It was just fantastic, and we played, we played Federal Parliament, Canberra. Like, it was incredible, but it was always, every gig was in the context of community arts, so it was never commercial.
Right.
Everything was in community arts festivals, or that sort of thing. Yeah. So
there was no bridge between that and, for want of a better term, the sort of the music industry. There's no bridge where those people can go. Whatsoever. Right. So then a question arises: shouldn't there be one?
Yes, there should be one. Of course, there should be one. But I think that I understand the music industry better than anyone, really. That that's not going to happen. The music industry is commercially based. You know, that, you know, that's why we have alternate music, because the music industry is commercially based, and if you know, you can make a living if you work in alternate music, but you're not really working in the commercial music industry.
Okay, when I read a bit about you, there was a reference to the South Sydney Youth Service. Could you? It doesn't say a lot about what you did there. So could you, if I've got that right, could you just expand on that part of your as a community-based career?
Well, I got that job, but because I did a job that was organised by the trade unions in Queensland, where I did songwriting in the jails, the women's jail and the men's jail, and out in the Indigenous public housing area called Inala, with young boys and girls. So it was three-pronged. I'm driving a van with all the gear in it, and every day, I mean, when I think about the things I did, the amount of work I did, and how much work I did on my own, it's extraordinary. So I did this job, and in the men's jail, it was all Indigenous musicians, and they were extraordinary. They were so great, and actually, right now, the Australian music industry is really the charts are filled with Indigenous musicians, because a lot of there's been a lot of push for diversification in Australia, and a lot of help to get Indigenous musicians, and their work they do is incredible. But I had these guys, and they were just writing the most gorgeous songs. And in the women's prison, there were some Indigenous women, but they're working out at Inala with the young boys. They were mostly boys. You know, there were about, I don't know, 12, 13 of them that I would meet. I think, you know, so I was rotating around those three areas. So every few days, I suppose. Yeah, so I had that job, and then that moved me into working in South Sydney Youth Service, which is right in the middle of the public housing area for Indigenous people in Sydney. And South Sydney Youth Service I didn't have a music program, so I started the music program there, and people would just come in every day. So it was full time. That was so great. I mean, to imagine you've got a job in community arts that's full time, that isn't just, I mean, it was project based, of course, but you know, that where you're working full time, you're not just working 4 hours a week, you're scraping by. You know, like I just as an aside, I'll get back to South Sydney in a minute. You know, I might, it's honestly true, I would have 5 or 6 different jobs a week, and I would have a room with a bag or instruments for each job, and I'd be driving all over Sydney, doing, you know, 2 hours here, 2 hours there, 2 hours here. But that's the life of a community arts practitioner. But so South Sydney, yes, I just ran. Oh yes, and then we had money for recording, so we went into studios that were local, which was really great. And I mean, there were all sorts of events. You know, things don't work out as well as you like sometimes, and you know, that things happen. But mostly it was all really, really great. There was a most amazing blind Indigenous man who was really into Tupac and introduced me to Tupac. My screen goes off every now and then. He introduced me to Tupac. Well, you know, and he was such a great artist. And you know, I worked with him. Worked with lots of people, lots of Indigenous people in that area. So that, yeah, in the South Sydney, I can't remember how long I did that for, a couple of years, I suppose. But you know, I was doing other jobs as well. For instance, I got a residency to go out to Mount Isa, which is a mining town in Queensland, to write a theatre show, do the music to a theatre show. And there I met, he was a young man then, one of Australia's greatest Indigenous musicians, a guy called William Barton, and his mother Delma Barton. And he was like a 14-year-old boy then. And I could tell that he and his mum, Delma, were brilliant. They were absolutely brilliant. And after I worked there doing the show, it was a residency of six weeks to put on a show with the people of, people who were interested in Mount Isa. After that, I invited them to come and stay at mine and took them to APRA, the Australian Performing Rights Association, where they could understand how the copyright worked. And, William got onto that straight away, understood that this is how you could make a living by writing music. And he's been unbelievably successful working in classical music, with traveling the world constantly now. And I'm not saying it's anything to do with me, but I'm just saying that's what happened. That he saw how you could make money out of music by going to the institution that pays for the uses of the song. It collects the fees for the use of the songs and then pays them back to the songwriter. For those of you who don't understand what APRA is, because it's the same as your PRS. Yeah.
Just before I come to Support Act, which is another part of your life, supporting musicians, you were talking about you would often have different jobs over a week, and so you're like a freelance community artist, which many people are here. Were there parts of, it sounds like you were playing a lot of music. Would some of that been trying to impart skills to people? Did you ever get to a situation where you were teaching other drummers or people to be enthused by the drums? Was that part of the work?
Oh yeah, of course. Like all the time, really. I had a job on the riverbank of Rockhampton, where I had to get all the drummers in the town, and that included Chinese drummers and whoever played what sort of drums. But I had 13 drum kits on the stage doing one piece of music. There was a whole drum pageant. It was incredible. And I also did the same thing in the Dandenongs, which is in Melbourne. I worked up there, and again, I had a whole lot of drum kits and people doing those. I actually wish now I could do that again, because now I have much more sophisticated ideas, simple ideas, because I've got more drum knowledge and more skills myself. So I would like to be doing that again. Yeah, so yes, but of course, because you're working with drummers, you have to be pretty sensitive though, because lots of particularly young kids, they think they know better than you, and they think they're better than you, and so you've just got to let them go, I don't mind doing that. I have no ego when I'm working, none whatsoever. I've seen everything, You just let them go and get on with it. It's in particular the songwriting, the arranging, the making sure that everybody's getting on. Like there's a lot of psychology behind the community arts. What I really hate with practitioners is when they are telling a group what to do. For me, it's all about getting the group to devise it themselves. It's all about that. You letting them do it themselves. Like, you should really be not putting anything, of yours in there. Just sitting back and letting it take part. And you should be making sure that, everybody's getting an equal chance to participate, and that, there's nothing going on that's wrong, making sure the equipment's working, helping out when people don't know what to do, finding new ideas. The hardest things are always lyrics, and I've got different games, and rhythm. I do rhythm workshops, and I had all sorts of rhythm exercises and games to do with all of that. Particularly, body playing with the body, one line of people doing steps with 4 and one line of steps doing steps of 3, putting 4s against 3, 5s against 4, those sorts of things. People love all that stuff.
Unless there's any other particular community music activities you want to talk about, I just thought maybe your work with Support Act might be worth looking into, because that was quite a substantial amount of the work that you did, wasn't it? Supporting musicians.
Yes, I can't thank you enough, Gordon, for taking an interest in this side of me, because no one ever takes an interest in this side of me. And it was like 25, 30 years of my life. So that I was doing all this. So in 1998, a group of Australians who were involved with the music industry, who were people with substantial standing in the music industry, got together and decided that they wanted to establish a charity, and get that started. So at that time, I was sitting on the PPCA board. Now, the PPCA is the Collection Society for the Sound Recording. So it's the it collects the fees for the use of the sound recording and pays those to the labels and recording artists. It's the equivalent of your PPL. And so I was mixing with people who were establishing the charity, and they knew I had a social work degree. So they asked me, would I like to help establish it, develop it? And I worked for the first 10 years, or maybe first 5 to 10 years, at 3 hours a week. I mean, it's just nuts when you think about it. But, you know, I was already used to that. You know, I was used to doing bits and bits and bits. And so I did that. And then after about 5 to 10 years, it grew and grew and grew. So my hours grew. I was never more than part-time though, because I wanted to stay in community arts. And in the back of my head, while I was raising my daughter, I always wanted to get back to music, but I knew that I couldn't really do that till she left home. But the charity is huge now. When COVID happened, the federal government gave the Support Act like 30 million to distribute. So it became huge. But when I started, I was going to gigs, this is pathetic, with buckets to get donations. You know, that's what it was like. I was walking out of gigs with buckets with money in them to get donations. And what we would do, and of course you can imagine what it was like building the policies, you know, like, oh my God, because the board was made up of well-established music industry people who knew nothing about social work, had no idea about the disadvantage that people might live in and what they would need, what the life of a musician, and crew in particular for me was pushing that crew had to be helped, because crew are the most disadvantaged. They really are. They just, you know, they have very, very rough lives. So I guess I just kept working to establish policies. What we would do, we would provide grants in the payment of bills. That's how it started. And it had to be defined how those bills were, you know, it was hard. Like, people had to send me the bills, then I had to send them to the accountant, and the accountant would pay the bills. And, you know, it was tricky. You know, there are all sorts of things. And first I think it was only like $2,000. And then, you know, of course, we moved it up to $5,000, $3,000, then $5,000, you know, and it was just fantastic. And then at first it was just people who were just really ill, and the application form was just horrible, because it went through every single aspect of their spending and what their income was. And, you know, people don't know how they spend money, and the financial literacy amongst musicians and crew is just appalling at any time. That's not a judgment, it's just a fact. And yeah, so it was an amazing job, really. It was an amazing time to build up an organization like that. But I wasn't sad to leave. I mean, I really wasn't. I left this time 2 years ago, post-COVID, and I was done, man. I was totally and utterly done.
Well, I mean, we've covered from the early 70s through the through the period through to the 90s and up till the recent period. And unless there's something that you might have thought, well, there's something I really need to get in on, that question of my community music career or that question, I do wonder where to now. I mean, what's happening now? Because I know, as you said, you've just left Support Act a little while ago. Where to now? What's the future holding for you?
Well, since I left in April 21, I've been on the road constantly. So during COVID, I started working really, really hard on my playing. And so I spent a couple of years, and then I was very fortunate to get a gig with this guy his name's Rob Snarsky, and we've just done an album. But I've been touring with him, so I've been touring with him for the last 18 months. I started getting all sorts of different gigs. I worked with a woman called Alex the Astronaut. She's a very popular young woman in Australia, but she hadn't worked with a drummer before her. I was her first drummer, and now she's got a young band, as she should. But you know, she'd always just written songs and hadn't worked with a drummer. We toured all the festivals. Worked with a trans woman called Cassie Judy, but the Rob Snarsky, that band's called, now we're just finished a mini album called Snarsky Circus Lindy Band. But I came over here to Newcastle on Tyne last year to work with the girl with the replaceable head, Taffy Hughes from Hurrah. And what we had done a album remotely, and I'd done the tracks in Australia. And then I came over and we did a tour. But I was never happy with the tracks. I just really wasn't happy with them, you know. So Taffy and I had been talking all the time by email, and you know, I said I'd come over and record an album with them. So that's why I'm here now. But except for I've now got another gig. But so I've just recorded an album with Taffy and Sylvie Hughes and Mick Porter on bass, and I'm really really happy with the we did it in Newcastle on Tyne. I'm just forgetting the name of the studio for a minute. It's terrible of me. It's Pauline Murray's and her husband's studio from Penetration, and Polestar. And Alex, their son, was the engineer and producer, and the drums sound beautiful. But I'd done the work back home. And then I managed to pick up a gig with Rob Lloyd from the Nightingales, who's just done a album with Janet Bean from Freakwater. She's from the US. A beautiful album. It's just stunning. And I'm playing live with them, reproducing the album and doing other songs. Now, that material is pretty tricky too. And so I've been working on that. I mean, we're playing Shepherd's Bush at the Bush Hall. And so all I'm doing, and I just this morning I got offered a couple of really great gigs back in Australia, collaborations with other drummers and one with one of the women from Zero, that we collaborate and produce something in the Museum of Old New Art at what's called the Dark Mofo Festival. So, you know, I'm 71, Gordon, and I figure I've probably only got till I'm 75 because, you know, we're ridiculous to assume that we can go on much longer. And one of the things that I learned from working at Support Act is how young musicians die. You know, we're lucky to get to 70. So I want to just spend the next 4 years playing and finding, you know, I was at probably the height of my drumming power at the end of the Go-Betweens because I'd been on the road for 10 years. I might have been messed up in the head by the end of that 10 years, but physically I was great. And, you know, I feel I'm even further than that now. So I should be. But if you see that the huge gap that I had in my playing career, but in fact, it might have been a good thing because it's very physically hard, and
Mm.
the life of a touring musician is extraordinarily difficult, you know, psychologically, I think. So, and that's another story for another time.
So the future
So
is
there you are.
playing and playing.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Okay.
I'll just be sure. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Lindy.